Hello everyone, I am Boofire191. In Gundam, being a Newtype is rough. 9 times out of 10, a Newtype ends up losing or killing the ones they have a spiritual connection with. They have a tendency of losing or killing their significant other, and they also have a tendency to have short lifespans because they're dragged into wars that ultimately get them killed. With that said, being a Newtype isn't as rough as just being a normal person in Evangelion, a setting where crazy awful shit happens all the time. This begs the question, could a Newtype survive in the world of Evangelion? Or more specifically, would Newtypes impact this depressing world? I want to state outright that this isn't about a specific Newtype surviving in the world of Evangelion, but rather the concept as a whole. This won't be about Amuro Ray kicking the shit out of angels, but will be instead about a concept that makes emotions tangible being introduced into a setting with extraordinarily emotionally broken people. Evangelion, being a deconstruction of the mecha genre, puts itself into a unique position. Deconstructions as a whole, and Eva is no exception, tend to take aspects that are mainstays in a genre and flip them on their heads in order to highlight issues with it or merely present it in another light. Instead of having an emotionally stable and courageous individual being forced to pilot a giant mech at the age of 14 to 16, Evangelion decides to make this individual emotionally unstable as well as justifiably terrified and timid. Now that subject specifically has been talked about at length, so I won't beat that dead horse. However, I bring up the question on whether or not a Newtype could survive Evangelion because the angel is the antithesis of a Newtype. To understand where I'm going with this, we need to first define what both a Newtype and angel is within their respective settings. Past this point, I'm not going to worry about spoilers, so consider this your spoiler warning for both Evangelion as well as the mainline Gundam Universal Century series and all the series attached to it. In Gundam, Newtypes are the next stage of human evolution as described by Zeon Zum Daikun. The idea behind said theory is that as man moves into space, the human body evolves and becomes more mentally aware to adapt to this new way of life. There's a saying that is uttered constantly within Gundam, souls weighed down by gravity, that alludes to the idea that gravity is what prevents individuals born as well as raised on Earth from becoming Newtypes. We'll ignore Amuro Ray because, there are a lot of issues behind the Newtype theory, Amuro, if taken at face value. However, this isn't a discussion on Newtypes specifically, so I'm going to ignore that for now. The main gist behind Newtypes is that they are the next stage of human evolution. What makes them interesting within the confines of Evangelion comes in the form of what they can do. Outside of a few Newtype inventions specifically that allow for psychic weaponry such as funnels, as well as the batshit insanity that's Psycho Frame, Newtypes, at their core, are just empaths. Put simply, an empath is someone who can understand or perceive someone's emotional and or mental state. Basically, instead of thinking someone is sad by the look on their face, an empath knows someone is sad due to feeling that emotion coming off of them. With that said, there is much more to it. Outside of just being empaths, Newtypes tend to have a wide assortment of unspecified abilities that just keep popping up. Oftentimes, when put with a piece of crazy Newtype tech, a Newtype or a collection of Newtypes can do things that are essentially impossible. This includes the Axis Shock, where Amuro, as well as several pilots on opposing sides, attempt to prevent the asteroid space station Axis from slamming into the Earth, thus destroying the planet. Another example would be time travel, as well as stopping a super laser with a psychic shield. It should also be noted that because Newtypes can feel the emotions of others so well, it isn't uncommon for them to fall into despair after being a part of or in the vicinity of a great tragedy. This can include massive loss of life, the death of someone the Newtype cares about, or other such awful things that are all too common to war. Basically, Newtypes are at risk of becoming incredibly mentally and emotionally unstable because they feel what those who suffer a tragedy feel on top of what they themselves already feel. In Evangelion, angels are beings that Shinji and the rest of NERV have to fight. What they are, however, isn't important to this video. What is important is what they can do. Throughout the series, we see the angels mentally attack the 3 Eva pilots. They tear them down by exposing the emotional problems they try to bury. With Evangelion being Evangelion, the aftermath of said attack is rarely good. Newtypes get great powers and advantages due to their emotional connection. However, because of their emotional connection, they are at a much greater risk of breaking down mentally or emotionally. So when you take into account the more fragile nature of a Newtype's psyche and pair it with an angel's ability to pry into someone's mind and toy with their emotions, often leading to a mental breakdown, you get one hell of a matchup. I'll be straight with you all. This question doesn't have a simple yes or no answer, but to explain why that is, I have to highlight the main problem essentially every single character in Evangelion has. They run away from their problems. One of the most prevailing memes that exists for Evangelion would be Shinji, get in the fucking robot, due to Shinji refusing to get into said robot before running away. I'm serious when I say essentially every character runs away from their problems, though, admittedly, they don't always do this by running. I'm not going to do a character analysis for everyone in Eva, however, here's a quick rundown of what I'm getting at. As a side note to the rabid Evangelion fanbase that just loves this shit, I'm doing a brief explanation to highlight something. A lot of the nuance and depth will just not be gone over. After having a mental breakdown, Asuka's mother treated a doll like her daughter, while at the same time ignoring Asuka. Eventually, her mother would commit suicide by hanging. A young Asuka would be the one who finds the body. Because of this trauma, Asuka put up an aggressive front that hid emotional wounds, which she bared. She kept people at arm's length despite wanting to be closer and have an intimate connection, something she never received from her mother. Toward the end of the series, the wall of self-confidence that Asuka put up around herself began to fall apart, leaving her in a vulnerable state. This would lead to a complete mental breakdown after the angel Arail, saying it that way, forced her to relive the memories that she never came to terms with. Asuka never confronts and deals with her childhood trauma. Instead, she chooses to ignore it, to run away from it, by building a wall to protect herself that also keeps others at bay. In the end, the angel Arail is able to exploit the emotional trauma and defeat Asuka, leaving her broken. There are several characters who go through something similar and handle it in a similar way, but I'm going to skip past them to keep this video at a sensible length. If you watch the show, which I recommend, you'll notice it and you know who I'm talking about. With that said, this idea of characters running from their problems persists within Newtypes. However, unlike the characters from Evangelion, the trauma that many Newtypes shy away from tend to be related to the unique nature of what they are, case in point being Amuro Ray and Char Aznavour. Both Amuro and Char didn't have the greatest of childhoods, however, it's safe to say that Char was left rather damaged due to his father's death as well as being separated from his mother. For a time, Char goes on a warpath to kill the Zabi family, but during his journey, he meets a girl named Lala. Due to both of them being Newtypes, they develop a connection and a relationship that seems to affect Char for the better. Eventually, Amuro meets Lala, and those two develop a connection. Lala's a thought. As Mobile Suit Gundam progresses, Char and Lala and Amuro get into a fight which results in Amuro accidentally killing Lala. This act scars both Amuro and Char. In Zeta Gundam, Amuro is still unable to move past Lala, an attitude that persists into Char's counterattack. Char, on the other hand, though still troubled by it, has done his best to move on by taking Camille Badan as his protege. As Zeta progresses, Char begins to act more heroic as he mentors Camille and eventually takes up the leadership of Ayug. However, at the end of the series, Char leaves a broken man due to Camille being brain raped by Shirako. His pupil, friend, and surrogate son suffered a fate worse than death, which kills any hope Char had left for humanity. Due to what happened to Camille, Char falls back into despair, is unable to move on from Lala's death, and loses it. He decides to alter the future of humanity by attempting to destroy Earth. Amuro is able to stop him, but in the end, both of them die. As a Newtype, Amuro becomes emotionally scarred due to his connection to Lala, which leads to him falling into despair. He's able to continue living, but he seems to find little joy in the things he does. Char is also emotionally scarred by Lala's death. However, his attempt to move on from it is shattered due to Camille, another person he came to care for, being essentially turned into a toddler. This results in Char completely breaking down and attempting to do something terrible. If Amuro, Char, and Lala weren't Newtypes, then what happened may have been easier to move on from due to the lack of that spiritual connection. They would have just had to deal with their own emotions instead of the combination of what they feel, what Lala felt at the time of her death, and the baggage that comes with that type of connection. Being a Newtype is a liability for someone's emotional state. There's more baggage associated with it that's just harder to shake off. So once again, the question has to be asked, could a Newtype survive Evangelion? As it stands, no. No, a Newtype could not survive Evangelion. Being a Newtype means opening oneself up to even more pain down the line due to the nature of Newtype connections and being able to feel others' emotions. If the characters in Evangelion rose to the occasion and were able to overcome their emotional turmoil, then the answer would be yes, a Newtype could survive. However, this doesn't happen in the show, even though End of Evangelion is a happy ending. The show's overall tone and outlook is incredibly bleak. The vast majority of characters don't overcome their problems because that isn't the show's point. In fact, I'm of the mindset that if Newtypes were in Evangelion, it would be even bleaker. Let's imagine for a moment that Shinji is a Newtype, since he's the protagonist and all. Due to the nature of what and who Rei is, I am almost certain that the pair would develop a Newtype connection. There's too much weird Evangelion shit going on with that relationship for it to not do that. We get to the scene where Rei dies, an event so traumatic for Shinji that it messes him up in the original show and leads to third impact in the rebuilds. Due to the baggage and hardship that a connection can lead to, as witnessed with Amuro and Char, Shinji would have to deal with so much more on top of his already fragile emotional state, and feelings he'd already have about her death. I can't say for sure what it would do to him, but considering the show's tone, as well as the fact that, again, in the rebuilds this led to third impact, I'm going to predict that would be the moment where Shinji breaks down completely. I can't even imagine what his reaction to Rei 3 would be. Evangelion is too pessimistic for its characters to overcome their emotional turmoil. Throwing even more baggage on top of that would just make everything worse. A Newtype in Evangelion would be a ticking time bomb. It wouldn't be a question of if they would lose it, but when. With that said, to also contradict myself, in Evangelion, if Newtypes existed in Evangelion, the universe could actually see its salvation, at least theoretically. As Char's counterattack and Gundam Unicorn has shown us, when a Newtype is put into a mech rigged with crazy, borderline magical nonsense, then things deemed impossible can happen. You have the Access Shock, which prevented the destruction of Earth, time-traveling unicorn, etc. Now, the Evangelion is borderline magical nonsense, the robot. Again, theoretically, if a Newtype in Evangelion was able to overcome their emotional turmoil and rise to the occasion, then it may be possible for said Newtype to save the day completely due to the Eva's crazy nonsense. As the show stands, a Newtype could not survive in Evangelion. However, if the show had a lighter tone, or if more of the characters were able to face their problems instead of run away from them, then a Newtype could be the key to a straight-up happy ending for Evangelion. With that said, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this video. I've been Bluefire191. I'll see all of you next time. Goodbye.